Welcome back to Beginner Miniatures. Today I'm doing a little bit of a different video on how to get started painting miniatures. There's going to be three things you're going to need to get started painting miniatures. The first is actual miniatures to paint. The second is paints to paint them with. And the third is the tools you'll need to paint them with. For the first of these being miniatures, there are a few different options of where you can get them. The first being from board games or miniatures games. The second being from actual retailers which sell miniatures just for painting, and the third being 3D printing. So for the first one, being from board games or miniatures games, these can be from games like Marvel Crisis Protocol. This is one of my favorite miniatures games and I play it a lot. This is a fairly standard and commonly known miniatures game. Everything you need to start comes in the box for this. It's a great starting point for miniatures games. There are also smaller miniature game companies like Night Models, which produces the Batman miniatures game, which I'm just getting into now. They create some really nice high-quality resin miniatures. You can also get it from things like board games, like this is Arcadia Quest by CMON, or Cool Mini or Not, and this comes with a ton of miniatures that are chibi and big head and would be easy to paint. You could also get models from dedicated resin sellers or other type of manufacturers that just make models to be sold for painting. You can get all kinds of different models from these sellers because they don't have to correlate to a board game or miniatures game. So you can get some really interesting sculpts and you can buy like just busts and stuff like that. The third option being 3D printing. Resin 3D printing has come a long way and you can actually get some really incredible prints off of them. And you can print whatever miniatures you can find on the internet. My personal favorite of these is getting them from actual board games, because I really like the games that go along with it and love the way it looks to have painted miniatures out on a table. The next thing you're going to need is paints. There are primarily three major paint brands that are sold for miniature painting. First of those being Vallejo, and I have a nice big set of their model color range here, which I really like. I like the finish that it gets and the price point that these paints are at. Also, one of the more standard brands is Citadel, which this one doesn't have the markings on it, but this is a mini Citadel paint pot. They are made by Games Workshop, which is the company behind Warhammer, so they're very standard. And then there's also the standard one of Army Painter. Here's one of their washes I have. This is their strong tone wash, if it will focus on it. And the benefits of Army Painter is probably that they're overall the cheapest one. Citadel is going to be your most accessible one. And then Vallejo, I think, is kind of in between on like price point and accessibility. It's fairly standard, but I really like the paints and the way that they go on. The next thing you'll need is some tools and things. Like here's a surface primer I use by Vallejo. This is just a brush-on primer or airbrush primer that I really like the way it works. Then you'll obviously need paintbrushes. There are two major types of paintbrushes. Synthetic paintbrushes like these, and natural paintbrushes, hair bristle brushes like these. The benefits of synthetic brushes is that they are really cheap. Like, I picked up a 50-pack of these size 1 brushes from Amazon, and I really like the way that they work. Your natural hair paintbrushes, though, will be higher quality and will generally hold a better tip, because this, if it will focus, is a size 3, and yet it still comes down to a very fine point. If I can get that to show. There we go. Some of the other most important tools you'll need is going to be some hobby clippers and X-Acto knives. These are for cleaning up the models and taking them off the sprues and cleaning off mold lines and all of that. You'll also need glues to assemble the miniatures. I have some Tamiya extra thin plastic cement here that I use for my plastic models. And then I also just have some super glue thin that I use whenever I'm working with like a resin model or whatever. Some optional stuff you might consider is some stuff for sanding off mold lines like sanding twigs, or here I just have some sandpaper glued onto popsicle sticks. And then makeup brushes. These make really good dry brushes. You also might want a wet palette, which is a palette which has water in a sponge underneath the parchment paper, so that way you can keep your paint wet while you're painting, so that way it doesn't dry out on you. Also, there's sculpting clays, like here's some green stuff by Army Painter that is really useful for filling in gaps on models. I also used it on this Night Model Batman miniature to fill in the base slot with some green stuff to get him mounted more solidly onto it. But right up on his shoulder there, he had some bubbles from the resin casting that I had to fill. You also might want some spray coats of lacquer to put over your miniatures to protect them, their paint job, while you're playing with them as a board game. This is some Tester's Dull Coat that I have, and I really like the way it gets because it's a very matte finish. My biggest recommendations from this, as for miniatures, would probably be Marvel Crisis Protocol. I really love the game and the miniatures that come in it, and think it's a great starting point if you want to get started painting miniatures or playing miniatures games. For paints, it would probably be a Vallejo paint set, because they are fairly cheap for the amount of paint you get, and I really like the quality of the paint in them. I would also recommend a brush-on primer, because this lasts a lot further than a spray can, in my opinion. And then if you're getting plastic models, the Tamiya Extra Thin Cement works quite well and makes it nice and easy. Obviously, an X-Acto knife and some type of clipper. And as for brushes, I would highly recommend this 50 set of synthetic paint brushes I found on Amazon, just because they're so cheap and so disposable, you can do whatever you want with them. I also think that they have really nice tips on them for painting. I'm going to try to put an affiliate link to as much of this stuff as I can in the description below this video, of anything I can find on Amazon that I mentioned here. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.